Welcome to ABA on Tap. I'm Mike Rubio with Dan Lowry. So without further ado, sit back, relax, and always analyze responsibly. All right. Welcome back to yet another installment of ABA on Tap. I am your ever grateful co-host, Mike Rubio, along with Mr. Dan. Mr. Dan, how you doing today, sir?
Doing great. Super Bowl Sunday. Excited for a special Super Bowl Sunday episode.
Well, we do have something very special coming up.
Absolutely.
They have the Puppy Bowl, right? That's one of the alternative.
We can talk Puppy Bowl for sure.
Yeah, maybe our guest has something to say about that. One of the premises that I think helped us develop our idea for this podcast and this idea of ABA on Tap and sort of a behavioral brew, if you will, was this notion of our experimental and empirical validation, the lab, and then for our everyday lives as practitioners, taking that with a margin of error into somebody's living room. And today we've got that. We've got the lab, very, very strong lab background here. And then not just the living room, but people's backyards and the dog park and the beaches. And so there's going to be a lot of parallels, I think, to explore today. Really, really excited for our guest today. So without further ado, we've got Dr. Erica Feuerbacher. Dr. Erica, thank you so much for your time. It's part of your weekend. We hope to make it a very casual, very invigorating conversation for about 2 hours. And again, learn all about the world of animal behavior. There's a lot of crossover here. It all stems from the exact same premise, if you will, or concepts. And then obviously the applications are different with different applications. So we like to start with the origin story here so we understand where our guests come from and their background, and then land on what we're doing now, and that'll open up the whole conversation. So tell us a little bit about what got you into animal behavior sciences and where it all got started.
Sure. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to chatting. So I grew up in Arizona, and my parents were very indulgent. I was an animal person through and through. They let me have just about all the animals I wanted. So we had horses and goats and sheep and
we cannot
parrots.
Let my girlfriend listen to this episode. Sorry, go ahead. She's from a farm too, and she just wants all of those in our backyard.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, we had guinea pigs and rabbits, pigeons, anything. It was fantastic. I feel really lucky. And I just loved being out working with my animals and interacting with them and watching. At that time, when I would say I want to do something with animals, it was, oh, you're going to go to vet school. And I was like, I don't know. That doesn't quite click with me, but I'm not closing any doors yet. So I did my degree at Arizona State in biology and ended up working a lot in ecology and physiology, studying honeybee behavior and genetics and things like that. And I had a successful project, got published, and I was like, well, I knew I wanted to go to graduate school. But I didn't really stop to think about what did I want to go in. And I liked the bees, and it was successful. So I went in insect physiology to Berkeley. At the same time, I gifted myself, as my graduation gift to myself, a working line German Shepherd puppy. Oh. And I wanted to do competitive agility with my new dog. That was my goal. And we were out in California, which was a really lucky strike there because it has an amazing dog training community there. Mm. And she was the dog that I had to run to catch up to training wise, that she had lots of ideas and lots of behaviors. And I needed to figure out how to work with her effectively. And I started doing some basic manners classes, and I was lucky enough to come across a really fantastic agility trainer who I ended up training multiple dogs with for 9 years when I was out in California.
Where in California?
And I just Bay Area. Okay, so nice. I was living East Bay, and then later on moved down to the peninsula.
Oh, man.
And and they had the San Francisco Dog Trainer Academy there, which I started attending. And I realized that I didn't go home and read about insect physiology. I went home and read about dog behavior and training. And I eventually had to admit to myself, even after passing my quals at Berkeley, that this was not my path there. And so I left and was lucky enough to get a job at Peninsula Humane Society in the behavior department. And I started working with shelter animals, helping assess adoptability, try and add skills to animals' repertoires that needed it, did offsite adoptions, mobile adoptions, and also started doing some dog training classes on my own, some group classes, and then eventually some private consultations. And I just loved it. And I also had so many questions about, am I doing the right thing? Is there a better way to do this? How could I enhance my training? And that really drew me back into graduate school. And I was lucky enough to attend a Clicker Expo, and Dr. Jesus Rosales Ruiz was there and talking about his lab. And I was like, he has a lab studying animal behavior and learning. And I was just dazzled. That was everything I wanted. I didn't know that was out there. So I eventually went to University of North Texas for my master's, got to work. My thesis was on concept formation in dogs. And we also did some work at a sanctuary with some lemurs and other exotics. And by the time I graduated, Dr. Clive Wynn had opened up his canine cognition and behavior lab at University of Florida. So I was lucky to continue into another strong behavior analysis program. And I got to do dogs again. And it was just amazing. So along the way, and this is something I'll come back to when we talk about getting into the field, I didn't just have a behavior analysis background. I had a biology background, and I was going to all the seminars and webinars and workshops I could get my hands on about dog training. And that gave me these amazing practical skills. And then behavior analysis gave me the science and let me know what I'm, how to enhance what I'm doing. So from University of Florida, I was lucky enough to get a job at Carroll College in Helena, Montana as an assistant professor in the anthrozoology program. I ran the dog program. And so I taught classes to undergraduates and then also had essentially a 20 dog rescue. So I would go out each fall and select 15 to 20 dogs, depending on the number of students we had, that my students fostered for the year and trained them in some, again, basic manners, and then a specialty task like service work, hearing dog work, or scent detection. And then those dogs were either placed with organizations, a few of them, most of them went on to be pets. And then I moved to Virginia Tech, where I get to continue studying animal learning and behavior and trying to spread the good word.
Wow. You've been everywhere. And great places too. You mentioned the was rescue center in the peninsula. Is that in San Mateo? Is that?
It is. Yeah, it was in San Mateo, and now they have a campus in Burlingame.
I must have done some level of work there, practicum or something. I'm not remembering very clearly. I'm an old guy, but that's how I'm trying to remember. Hopefully before the end of the episode, I remember what I was doing there at some point. But I spent some time in the peninsula from 92 to 2001. So
cool.
Yeah, good place to be. You mentioned Berkeley. That's a great intellectual hub. Great place to be. When you were talking, you sort of differentiate. I like to talk about. Well, we talk about human and non-human animal behavior. I like to joke that us animals with the big foreheads try to pretend we're a little more exclusive. You use the word exotic, and then when we talk about dogs, I guess those are domesticated animals. What's the difference in your experience in applying methods and procedures, say, to those two different species or types of species in terms of something being exotic versus domesticated? Is there a difference in the way things are implemented, in your opinion? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of things. I certainly have more work with domesticated species, doing most of my work with dogs, some with horses and some with cats. And that was my main experience with exotics. I have colleagues that do even more work with exotics. But I think some of the differences are, and it might not be great, but our animals are usually less fearful of us because we've domesticated them. We also typically socialize them when they're young. Of course, we do have feral cats or things like that didn't have that. So they're domesticated species. We kind of get a little bit of a pass on them wanting to hopefully be near us.
Right.
But I don't think we should also take advantage of that or take that for, a standard that we're certainly going to come across dogs that are fearful, and we need to figure out methods to help them feel comfortable around humans. So that's one thing is we might start off a little bit ahead with most of our domesticated that they're going to approach us. The other is, so going back to that, we're going to have to work maybe a little harder to make sure those animals are willing to approach and work with us.
Sure.
Some of those are certainly also potentially really dangerous animals. And so there's a lot of protective contact. So working across a fence line, and my cat's here.
Perfect timing.
He's come. Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of work that's done across a fence line rather than going in with the animal. The thing I think that is really interesting is our domesticated species, we are starting to take techniques from the exotics world because they really can't be hands-on. They can't be pushing the animal into a sit, right? Or applying aversives, or the animal's just going to avoid them. So the folks that work in like zoo settings have had to be really creative in how do we get this animal to approach and work with us? And so they've really been at the forefront of developing cooperative care where the animal willingly participates in like getting a vaccine or a blood draw. And, with our domesticated animals, we sometimes take advantage and just like hold the cat on the table, right? Which is really aversive to them. And so I think one of the things that I really love is seeing those amazing things that these folks working with non-domesticated species are doing and saying, we should absolutely be able to do that with our domesticated species, right? If you can get a cooperative blood draw from a wolf, I should be able to do it with my dog. So I think there's a lot to learn from them. They're going to have more protective contact than we will. Although my horse had a lot of behavioral issues when I first got him, and I did actually a lot of training across the fence line because he was too dangerous to go in with at that time. So I think there's a lot to draw from that we don't actually have to go in with our animal right away to work with them. We can do a lot of work across a safe space until we kind of build up those safe behaviors for them to be around us.
Will you talk a little bit about what it is you're looking for in terms of the animal being ready for you to approach? So I think there's a lot of crossover discussion here.
Yeah.
Say we talk about building rapport with kids, for example.
Yes.
And I like the way you put it, and I think that's something that's gotten us into trouble as practitioners as a whole, not us specifically, but this idea that maybe we take advantage of this authority we have to then prompt into certain behaviors. And then the other side you put it is, well, we shouldn't need to do that if we take the time. And then there's this idea of early intervention. So time is of the essence, and everybody wants to train these specific behaviors and responses. But tell us a little bit about some of those procedures, protocols in terms of approaching the animal, whether it's, across the fence line. When do you know there's readiness? What gradual processes are involved? There's got to be a lot of patience. You're going into it knowing that there's a lot of time to put into this, a lot of repetition, a lot of time, a lot of effort.
Yeah, absolutely. And your phrase of building rapport, I use that as well with our animals. That I'm always my favorite story about this was I had my students that had been training their dogs in Helena, and we took them downtown Helena to work in a more busy area and start to generalize their behaviors to new, more distracting environments. And this woman came by to one of my students and wanted to say hi to the dog, and she asked if she could say hi, and the student said yes. And the woman wanted to, say something to the dog and have the dog interact. And the dog looked at her nicely, maybe came up, and then went back to the student. And the woman was offended. And she said, "Oh, because I don't have the cookies." And I was like, but it's weird to assume that this animal's going to interact with you when it's been living and being trained with this student for like 8 months by now. And so I think it's weird for us to assume that these dogs or any animal is going to respond to us the way we want them to when we haven't built that rapport. Like you have to create value, right? We have to let them know, I have things that are meaningful to you, valuable to you. I have contingencies that are clear, right? I'm not going to trick you. I'm going to apply as few aversives as possible.
I'm safe.
And yeah, exactly. You want to show the animal that you're safe, that they can, what you say you're going to do, that you're predictable, and that you provide lots of reinforcers. And I don't think that's any different than building rapport with kids, right? Trying to find things that are valuable to them, providing them contingently, pairing them with ourselves with Pavlovian conditioning. Yep. So it's the same with animals. And I'm always sort of flabbergasted when people don't take the time. And I have a lab with my students now where it's just building rapport. I said, I don't want to hear you ask that dog to do anything. Oh, man, I don't want to hear you asking them to sit or come or anything. You're just there to give them things they like. Yeah. Once you do that, then you can start training or asking them to engage in certain behaviors. But we tend to put demands on them really quickly.
Right. I love your example. It's good parallel to some of the things we do in terms of helping kids engage in greetings. And in your example, the dog did something in response that was that version of the dog's greeting, I will say, and then said, okay, I'm done with you. I'm back. And you're right. We have this, especially with kids, we've got this ideal vision of like, the child's going to respond, oh, hello, and wave and all these things. Like, no, if they turn their gaze towards you, that might be it. And then you're going to come back and try that hello again at some point, or maybe you're not. But I really love that example and the way you described that, because I think that's very valuable for all of us to understand, and some sort of agency in terms of the other organism, and saying, hey, that's it. That's your greeting. And yeah, you're right. I don't have the cookies, and I haven't been giving you cookies for, over the last 3 months, or giving you other things that are reinforcing to you. So I may not be that interesting to you. I have to become interesting to you. So thanks for sharing that, Dan. I've been hogging up all the time. So go ahead, sir.
It's all good. So you mentioned the blood draw with even wolves or something like that. I imagine the stakes can be pretty high when you're talking about some exotic animals like the zoo type of things. And that just hit home a lot with a lot of the kiddos we work with things like haircuts or even blood draws for them. A lot of times they consist of, haircut is kid goes to this hair salon or place and they get held down and somebody's cutting their hair real quick and then they get let go and they're, obviously very much
frantic.
in distress. Everything's in distress and it's this traumatic for them, very environment. So next time they even see a hair salon, their physiology is starting to get kind of wonky, and that becomes habitual because it's kind of successful in the fact that it gets the hair cut. But we've done a lot of, work with the desensitization side of just being in these areas for periods of time without even the expectation of getting a haircut to get your body in a position where then you're able to kind of take the next steps. Do you do similar kind of stuff on the animal side of things? Just expose them to the different areas and the people and slowly get them into a position where they feel comfortable enough? Because I imagine the animal has no idea what a blood draw is or why that's happening or anything like that. So what does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. We come across the same issues where, the dog goes into the vet and it's rambunctious or whatever. And same thing, it gets restrained. Even it might not even be that rambunctious, but it gets restrained and then a blood draw, like a poke. And so you're absolutely right. It starts to learn very quickly that vet offices are scary. There's studies that have shown that we start to see stress-related behaviors in our dogs as they enter into the waiting room, right? They hit that smell of the vet office and they're like, oh, I know where I am. This is not Petco, right? I'm not coming to get treats. And you're absolutely right. It just gets worse. So the more you handle them that way, the worse it gets. The next time they come in, they're worse. And eventually you get up to the point where they're probably engaging in some aggression to try to escape. So ideally, we'd start with dogs or any animal that has no experience yet, and try and build from a blank slate that this is a good place, that you have agency, you can escape. Sometimes bad things will happen, but they're very rare and they're predictable, and that you can opt out. And of course, then we get the animals that have already had bad experiences. And that's really where it comes back to, well, now we have to start from a negative space and try and work our way back up. And so that is a lot of desensitization, counter conditioning. A lot of vet clinics now offer what they call no poke visits, which are great. You take your dog in.
Yeah.
They get to meet with the staff, they get cookies, they get neat things, and then they leave. Yeah. And there's been a little bit of research into that can be helpful, but I think there needs to be more along those lines. But I really appreciate that folks are thinking about that now and trying to improve that experience for the animal rather than just thinking, well, I'll just manhandle them and we'll get the job done. One of my shepherds, and I find that German shepherds tend to oftentimes learn fear responses quickly, or they're very good at pattern seeking, like that was a bad thing, I'm going to avoid that. He was going to go to the vet and have all these nice visits as a puppy, but he ate rocks as a puppy, so he had to go in kind of on an exactly on an emergent issue, and so he didn't get that nice exposure and all the good things. And so he did have some challenges with vets from the very get-go. And I had to be very careful about the vets I found. And I had one in Helena that would walk in with a peanut butter jar, and she'd just plop the peanut butter jar in front of him, and he'd start licking. And then the nice thing was, every time we went back in for a visit, his behavior got better. And that's what we really want to see. And it's so much better for everyone, not just the animal, but I'm less stressed taking them in. I'm more likely to take them in early if I know it's not going to be a really awful event for everyone. And of course, it's safer for the veterinarians too if the animal is feeling good.
All right. There could be measures they have to take to then guard themselves, and that only makes adds more stimuli that may not be inviting. That's so interesting. You mentioned the dentist. I walk into a dentist office and get the smell or hear that drill, and that gets me going immediately. And that's one of the things that has been more successful, I think, in our line of work. Our dentists that are, a lot of our clients would have to go under sedation to do their dentistry work, and there's a lot more dentists that are now doing these nothing visits. These just come by, sit in the chair, have some fun, get the stickers and the balloons, and then do that 2 to 3 times, and then before they try any sort of procedure with the child. And imagine that's been super successful. Sort of bringing down the anticipation, the anxiety, whatever we want to call it, right? I'm also a victim of white coat hypertension. So I can take my blood pressure here at home and I'm great. You get me to the doctor's office, they're concerned. I'm like, I'm sorry, it's you.
Yeah.
When you're not here, I'm great. Something about the smell of alcohol. I don't know what it is, but I'm nervous. I'm sorry. Let's do it again at the end of the visit after I've met you. It's really cool to hear all those procedures of desensitizing, again, even with a dangerous species. Does that mean sometimes there's still a fence between you and the animal, but they're able to approach the fence for you to work with them? Is that also a condition that's common?
Yeah, so in the exotics world, for sure, that protected contact, they'll have, those trainers are just super clever. They'll have rhinos come and push their hip up against the fence so they can do a vaccine back there, or they'll have dolphins trained to float on their back so they can get an ultrasound, or present a flipper to get a blood draw. It's amazing. And I think that's always inspirational to see if you can get these species that haven't evolved with us and haven't evolved to work with us in any way to cooperate. There's no reason we can't do this for our companion, our domesticated animals, and just improve their welfare and ours a lot.
How often are you finding, so you mentioned like sedation at the dentist, with the kiddos that we work with, a lot of times it's Benadryl, if we can kind of put them to sleep naturally with Benadryl, or sometimes the kiddos that we work with, it comes to the point of needing anesthesia at the dentist. I imagine with animals that a lot of times it's just like, let's sedate them, give them anesthesia, or the exotic ones probably let's tranquilize them and just get it done. So are you finding is that changing kind of the view on that in terms of not just using that as the immediate first go-to, or is that still kind of just the easiest way to do it and least painful for these species?
Yeah, so I think it kind of varies by situation. So I think in the exotics world, the go-to was the tranquilization, right? We're going to tranquilize you, which can be pretty dangerous, right? When you're dropping 1,000-pound animals, and then you're going to have to, have them get back up, and that can always be dangerous. And of course, repeated sedation can be, challenging for them as well. So I think for them, it was really trying to get away from having to tranquilize over routine things, right? Like a teeth cleaning or something like that. Certainly, they're going to still tranquilize for bigger procedures or for animals that need to have something done but don't quite have the skills to be able to cooperate with that procedure yet. But I think it's trying to reduce the tranquilizing on that front. I would say on the companion animal side, there is, I think, more openness to bringing in like anxiolytic drugs. So giving your cat something before they come to the office, or your dog. So not necessarily fully like knocking them out, but just bringing those stress levels down a bit. So hopefully everybody's calmer, safer. They're not learning they're not getting any more fear conditioning, and maybe even learning some nice, good behavior. So I think there's a little bit, I'd say overall, less on the tranquilizing side, especially for the exotic animals on routine procedures, but still a real openness to using meds whenever we need to make things better for all parties involved.
Yeah. Gotcha. So you use the term anxiolytic to like kind of bring the physiology down a little bit. 2 dogs that we had that passed away a couple of years ago, one of them, it was kind of interesting because he was just very like on edge a lot. And I think it was because when he was younger, he got picked on and he was never really sweetest dog, but like very scared until he would get to know you, and then he'd be like your best friend. But he would go to the vet and they would give him like multiple doses and just wouldn't for some reason it wouldn't take with him, or his physiology overcame even the anxiolytic. Wow. Like he just wasn't able to calm down in the vet.
Yeah, I think some of these animals, they have a lot of challenges, right? They might not have had the right socialization. We know epigenetics and genetics play a factor. And so if you're coming from a fearful mother, you're likely to be more fearful. So there's a lot going on with our dogs. And like I said, improper socialization, traumatic events that you might not even meant to be traumatic, right? Bad things happening, things happening in the vet that, maybe it hurt more than anticipated, or they had to do multiple sticks to get the blood draw, all of those things. And then I think what's challenging is those situations are very salient for our animals, right? It's a very unique situation that they're put in very infrequently. So it really stands out. That smells weird, that looks weird, and they do bad things to me there, right?
Sure.
And so they get that just infrequently. And it is hard to convince. And I know I'm one of them. It's hard to take the time to say, well, I'm going to drop by the vet office all the time with my animal, right? To try and dissipate that. So it really does become almost a 1-to-1 ratio of when I'm at the vet office, bad things happen. And so it can be certainly hard to overcome that.
I'm seeing the dog-friendly cafe with the veterinary office next door idea.
Yes,
kind of developing.
That's a great idea. Yeah.
Boom.
So if somebody out there wants to take it, let me know if you want to give me any kickbacks. Go ahead. Dave.
Oh yeah. So about that specifically, and you probably dealt with this a lot when you worked in the Humane Society. So like I said, this dog was, I guess, kind of picked on by the litter until he was about 1, and then my girlfriend took him in, and he lived till 12-ish, somewhere in that age. Yeah. But he still had like this anxiety around unknown people, unknown dogs, which he was able to overcome. But I mean, this perpetuated for a long time in his life. And it seemed like it could have just been, nature, like his personality type, but his twin or litter mate, she was not like that at all. So my question to you is, these dogs that maybe have experiences at younger ages, do you find that with a lot of training, they can, he lived a fine life, but they can completely overcome it? Or is it sometimes when they experience some trauma at a younger age, they just aren't able to fully get past it?
Yeah, I don't think there's great research on that. I'll just give you some anecdotes. I would say generally when I talk to owners that have dogs like that, and we have one of our rescue dogs is like that. He's been with us for 2 years and is still a little hesitant around my male partner, who's like very nice to him, but he's just got probably some history with men, and I don't think it's ever going to go away.
Wow.
So I think when I talk to owners with dogs like that, I think we can make strides, and it sounds like you did too, right? You get improvements here. They can do more and more. Their world starts to open up a little bit. But I think there's always a flavor to that dog, that they're just going to be a little more cautious working through their world. They might benefit from having a smaller world. They might not be the dog that is going to want and enjoy going to a farmer's market. And so we work a lot with owners who's trying to recognize what their dog enjoys and what it doesn't. And I appreciate that people want to interact so much with their dogs and make their dogs so much a part of their family that they want to take them to the farmer's market. And there's certainly dogs that love going to farmers markets, and there are lots of dogs that don't. And I think we have to recognize that like, as much as I want my dog with me, my dog will not enjoy this. And so I have to respect what my dog really wants. So I think our behavioral principles are so powerful, and we can make such great change, but it's not complete, right? There are many things, and especially fear and anxiety, that I think are harder to overcome. It's going to take a lot of work. And in their lifetime, we're probably not ever going to get them to be that happy-go-lucky dog. We're going to hopefully have made them feel safe, and they start to, like I said, interact more, go more places. But that's a dog that I'm always going to protect as well, because I think if they do have another bad experience, it's going to really set them back. There are certainly dogs that are more resilient. When something bad happens, it's well, that was weird, but that's not how the world works. And there are other dogs when that same bad thing happens, it's like, oh, their world is shattered, and the world is a bad place now. And, that probably comes back a lot to genetics and epigenetics and some early upbringing, things that the average owner isn't going to have any control over. So, I always err on the side of this dog is going to be really sensitive, and one bad thing could really send us off course. So I'm going to try and prevent that and make sure bad things don't happen.
Did you deal with that a lot at the Humane Society, where you got a lot of dogs that had trauma for whatever reason, and it was just really difficult to make them adoptable, or even appear to people walking in that made them present like that somebody would want to adopt them? Like, was that something that you dealt with a lot?
Yeah, there are a couple of challenges, and you've hit on a few. One is kennel presentation, and shelters are inherently stress-inducing. You are in small, tight quarters with a lot of other of your conspecifics yelling at you, but you might not get to interact with them. You have limited social interaction with humans. It's loud, it's weird, it's unpredictable. So, research has identified a lot of stressors, and some of the shelter dogs have 3 to 5 times the levels of cortisol that your dog at home has. So really, really stressful. And that can, of course, it's an establishing operation. It's going to induce different behaviors. And so sometimes we see animals really shut down and become really kind of reclusive a little bit and not interact as much. And others go bonkers and they seem like they're out of control. And why would I ever want that animal in my house? And then you take it home and it's like really chill and a easygoing dog. So what we've advocated for, we've done a lot of research. My colleague, Dr. Lisa Gunter, and I have looked into fostering, and that we do see that taking the dog out for even a night or two, their cortisol significantly drops. They rest a lot better at home. And I think that's where we're going to get a more true, or more accurate representation of what that dog's going to be like in a home. It's really hard to predict behavior from this very different environment to, what they're going to be like at home when their cortisol levels change. All the environmental stimuli are different. So that's a big one, is trying to predict from what they present in the kennel, how are they actually going to be at home? And that's why fostering is wonderful. But certainly there are a lot of dogs that come in with a lot of fear-related behavior, and that you're trying to overcome, and you don't quite know, exactly what the stimuli are. You kind of try and piece it together based on what you see, like, oh, they've growled at 3 men, but no women. So maybe it's a man thing. Well, maybe it's a man with hat thing. Maybe it's tall men, trying to figure out, like, what are the stimuli that might induce that behavior? And then, sometimes it changes, right? They generalize. So that's always a challenge. And then can we change how they feel about those people? And this gets back to our prior question. You might be able to change it to some extent, but I think you always have to recognize that this dog might have challenges around men, and you're going to have to be really careful and not let men approach. And I always talk about being an advocate for your pet, that you are there as their protector. So if someone's approaching, I will body block my animal, separate my animal from the person approaching. And I always let my animal decide whether they want to approach that person. I think we have a tendency for the owner to say, yes, you can pet my dog, and the dog gets no say in the matter.
Oh, interesting.
So, if somebody asks to pet my dog, I'll say, if my dog approaches you, you can say hi. And if he doesn't, he's not in the mood right now. So,
wow. Okay.
Sorry, I probably veered off topic there.
No, this is great. This is great. I guess the question that comes to mind, and it's a matter of pragmatism. So, the idea that your dog is a rescue dog and it seems to be reactive to men, and now you are walking around with that dog, and I guess you have one of 2 options, or maybe more options, but to say, so I'm going to make sure that no men approach my dog, or can I continue to try that exposure? And if a man's approaching, say, hey, not so responsive to dogs, if you want to try, go ahead. So do you feel like that training or that exposure can continue toward reducing that reactivity, or are we saying that there's just no way to get past that trauma, or whatever we want to call it?
Yeah, I think you're going to see improvements if you do it really carefully. I think what people tend to do is they push their dogs too far.
Okay.
And they say, well, let's just have that man approach. Oh, that didn't go well, right? And then the dog's even further back. So this is one where, this is, again, where I'd probably give the animal more agency of, like, do you want to approach? But I have met dogs that also make bad decisions where they're like, I want to go see that person. And then they get up there and like, holy cow, I'm by this really scary person. And then engage in, lunging and barking. And so I think as an owner, you have to kind of be ready to support your animal. We do a lot of things like, if they start to approach somebody and it's a nice response, we'll tell them yes, but throw the treat further away from that person. So they learn, oh, I can escape from that situation. And I think that's where we start to see improvement, is where the animal starts to learn, I have some control here. I don't have to approach, or if I approach, I can leave. Just making sure that they know that there's always an escape. I think that helps a lot. So with careful training, yes, I think you can make improvements. It's again one of those where I would always put in lots of safety hatches for my animal along the way. If I know that it's had problems with men in the past, that I'm going to have lots of sort of checkpoints to make sure the dog's still okay as we proceed in letting them greet this new man, and being able to call the dog away if I think it's not going well. We had a Belgian Malinois who's a rescue, and she had a lot of what we call just general stranger danger. If you're in her club, you're very much in her club. And if not, she would lunge and bark. And it took me about 7 years to figure out how to introduce her to people in a safe manner. And that was, we'd go outside and I'd have the person stay outside the house. I said, I'm going to let Aegis out and she's going to run out and I'm going to throw her ball right away. She was just, gung-ho about her ball. So she'd focus on playing ball and then would kind of sweep past that person like, oh, you're new. But kind of like do a little sniff and then keep going because she's playing with her ball. And then we could move inside. But it took me a long time to figure out sort of that structured introduction, and other introductions for her would not work as well. So I had to find something that was really meaningful, set up a situation where she could engage in this meaningful activity, and that person was just there and could become background to her. So a lot of it is trying to figure out what's going to work for your animal. How can I do this introduction so that you feel safe?
There's so much nuance in what you just described. I love it. And I think that, for us as practitioners, oftentimes we find a little frustration with how we train our technicians in trying to impress upon them some of the things you're talking about, because we get offended as people, right? So I made an overture toward a child and they didn't look over at me, didn't say hi. In fact, it didn't even seem like they listened. And now I'm offended and I have to do something to make sure that I seem like the authority figure. And then what you described there is a whole different, approach. And it's, again, I think a really good crossover. I really hope a lot of our techs or people that we work with get to listen to this, because I think what you're describing is very applicable in what we do. Maybe given our time constraints or just our own urgency, self-imposed a lot of times, we push it too hard. And then the child has a behavior and we're blaming it back on the diagnostic trait, or, I'm sure it happens with you too. Well, that dog, that particular breed of dog or that must have been the cause of it. But no, at the end, you were pushing too hard. You didn't pay attention. You didn't take the time to build that rapport. Back to that idea.
Exactly.
I'm sure you've got a ton of anecdotes or stories of where you've seen people do this. I don't know if any come to mind, or any situations where you've been in the lab or any circumstance and you're watching somebody push it too hard and you're like, oh, I think this and this is going to happen. And then suddenly you see them get bitten. Or is that something that you come across maybe more frequently than you want to?
Yeah, and I think when people don't get bitten, it's a credit to the animal that they didn't.
I like that. I like that. We're going to use that.
And I see people do dumb things so frequently, and you're like, wow, you got lucky that animal didn't do what it could have done there, and probably would have been well in its right to have done.
Yeah.
So yeah, I see people really not listening to animals very carefully at all. Even not just their own animal, or other people's animals, but their own animal. Some of my experiences, I had my that reactive Mal. She was on a gentle leader. This was like a little doggy halter, and we were working in Petco, and she was being nice and attentive to me. And I got her a red gentle leader, hoping that would be like a warning sign. But she's also, these are German Shepherd-y looking dogs. They're police dogs. I wouldn't approach any dog this way, but I certainly wouldn't approach a dog that I know is oftentimes bred for that sort of work. And I would still have people just kind of rush us, just kind of barreling up to say hi to her. And I just became super aware of my environment, of who's coming where. I felt like, you're paranoid, like who's coming behind me. So they could always find my escape hatch. And if somebody's coming up, I was moving away, creating distance for her. So folks that have had a reactive dog probably know that, where you just have to become hyper vigilant and really look out for, who's not going to listen to my dog and who's not going to stop and ask appropriately to interact with them. So yeah, it happens quite frequently. I had my shepherd at a dog park in Florida, and he just loved to carry his toy around. And and he was really obsessed about it. if you asked him to drop it in the right way, it was under stimulus control. I could ask him to drop it and he would. But some random person just came and opened his mouth to get the toy out. And I was like, why would you do that? Right? He's a German Shepherd. That's his toy. What right do you have to take his toy away? You didn't ask nicely. You didn't ask me. And if he bit, I'm sure that person would have blamed my dog on biting him, right? Yeah. And it's like, but I can't believe you just pried my dog's mouth open. And again, it was a credit to him, my dog, that he didn't bite.
Wow.
Yeah, that's you avoided a lawsuit there. Good. I mean, they avoided a bite too, but yeah, you're right. They would have blamed it right back on the dog. And it's like, well, that's a canine. It's got sharp teeth, and you put your hand right where they tend to bite.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's really absurd the things that people will do. Yeah. So that's always a big thing that we try and do is educate people on how to appropriately interact, and that not all animals want to interact with you the way you want to interact with them.
And any key points that you try to impress upon people with that? I mean, so what do you think is the inclination? And we see the same thing with the population we work with in terms of there's a certain level of authority that people come in with in terms of animals or kids, and it's because I say so, and I'm the adult, or I'm the owner, or I'm the human. What do you think that is, and what is it you lend to people in terms of education to really make them realize, hey, this is an organism with agency, and it's beyond instincts and impulses. In fact, we'll get into that a little bit in terms of human dog connection, which can be beyond, it can feel beyond typical just animal human parameters or interaction. There's a lot of magic that happens. But what do you think makes people come in with that hubris and saying, like, I'm the authority figure, and even though this dog could really hurt you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think luckily, I think much of our world is starting to move away from that. There are still certain trainers that do take that, because I said so kind of approach. And there's a lot of more aversives used to induce compliance. But I think we talk a lot more about giving our animals choice, recognizing that they have their own lives, right? I think about this one when I see my cute cat walking by and I pick him up. I'm like, my cat had his own plans, right? He was on his way to do something. And I just swooped up and picked him up. And it's like, how intrusive, right? That to think that I could be wanting to do something and somebody just swoop me away to interact with them. And so I think really appreciating all the things that go on for our animals, all the things they like and dislike and engage in. And I think really seeing how unique and individual they are, and that they have their own lives. And I think about this a lot when you're walking your dog and it wants to sniff. And you're like, I don't see anything there. I don't smell anything. But they've got some amazing information they're gathering there. And it's really important to them. And then you'll see some people try and drag them away, right? Because that's not on the agenda. The agenda was walking, not stopping and sniffing. And so I think trying to find some harmony there, that yes, sometimes you want to go on an exercise walk. And can you communicate to your dog that we're on an exercise walk? And so we're not going to stop. But I'll give you time later or earlier where you get to do all the sniffies you want to sniff, right? Still making sure that we give our animals those opportunities. And it makes me so happy when I see somebody walking their dog. And especially when I see somebody like jogging, when I know they're out for exercise and their dog stops to sniff and they stop and let them sniff. I'm like, oh, it just warms my heart that this person, that their plan was to get exercise, but they prioritized their dog wanting to stop and do something else. And then they went on with their jog. And I just think that's really lovely to see what our animals are interested in. And I think it's just so fun to say, like, oh my gosh, you are really into whatever is down there. Or one of our dogs loves just naturally tracks. He will track animals that have crossed through our yard. And it's just so fun to watch him engage in that behavior. And yes, sometimes I need to go to work, and so we can't track fully, but then we try and give him other opportunities later to track what he wants to track.
What a cool on-off paradigm you just described there. So sometimes you're going to get to sniff around and we'll take the time, and then sometimes not. And I think people tend to think that if you give that opportunity to sniff around, they're always going to do it. But the way you describe that, again, is so applicable to human behavior and what we do in terms of building that rapport with a child and letting them know, well, there'll be time for that. And then sometimes I'm going to place this strict demand on you. And then sometimes, within reason, I'm going to swoop you away if you're in danger. But otherwise, I'm going to try not to physically prompt you that way because you've got your own plan. So again, so many crossover applications there. I love the way you describe that.
So I wanted to go back. You kind of breezed right through it, but I think you said in your undergrad you had a really successful project, maybe a research project or something like that. Can you elaborate, or do you want to elaborate on what that was? Because I bet it was pretty interesting.
Yeah. My honeybee project, we were looking at pollen and nectar foragers, and it turns out that it's a really interesting system. So these are honeybees that there are a couple genes that you can predict whether they're going to be, based on their combination, whether they're going to be a pollen or nectar forager. And essentially there's like sensitivity. So if the pollen is really low, or let me start the other way. If there's plenty of pollen in the hive, you'll still have some foragers that go out and forage for pollen. And the other ones are like, well, we have plenty of pollen. I'm going to do other things, maybe foraging for nectar. But when the pollen starts to drop in, like they don't have as much pollen, suddenly these nectar foragers might become pollen foragers. And so once that hive level changes, a nectar forager might become a pollen forager or vice versa. But at certain levels, I always think about this with cleaning, right? Like I might have some cleanliness level, like one plate in the sink might be too much for me, but a housemate might not feel like they need to clean until there are 15 plates in there, right? And so it's just different levels of sensitivity to your environment of whether it's time to clean or not, or time to forage for nectar or pollen. So we were looking at that, and there were also some morphological and differences between the standard, the bees that would continue to forage for pollen when there's plenty of pollen. They were usually slightly smaller worker bees than the nectar foragers. And I think they also had maybe higher metabolic rates slightly. So those genetic differences came out morphologically as well. So that was kind of what we were looking at.
So you were looking at whether they would forage for nectar or pollen based on the dynamics in the hive? Is that...
Yes. Okay. Yeah. And so the bigger project that I was working in was that, and mine, we did some DNA sequencing to identify which alleles they had in a certain gene. And then I did some metabolic studies with them. So looking at their oxygen consumption to get their metabolic rates, and found differences between pollen and nectar foragers there.
And they adopt different communication systems, right, within the hive, if I remember correctly. Do you know anything about that? I'm sure you had to get into that a little bit. I remember those being really interesting cues that you wouldn't expect bees to emit, but they're talking to each other.
It's crazy because my girlfriend she wants every animal, so we got bees for a while. For a few years. Yeah, right? Yeah. They ended up getting Africanized or whatever because they went through a few queens, I guess. But like the dynamics of a beehive are just like crazy on like the society that they form, and the communication that they have is just. She was like really, really fascinated by that whole process, and like introducing queens, and then like I guess the forager bees or whatever, the male, I forget the name of them, that go out and come back, and then some stay and protect the bee, and like they got a whole society going on in there.
Yeah, they do. It's really complex, and those jobs will change over the lifetime of the bee. So. Wow. The foragers are the old bees. They are putting out their old bees because it's the riskiest behavior, right? You're going out where predators can pick you off. So they're putting out, usually the foragers are coming up on the end of their life anyway. So they're older bees out there usually. Yeah, the communication is really complex. It also varies by locality. So I think there's the waggle dance and things like that might not be as pronounced in bees along the equator because that sun, doesn't shift as much in the sky. Oh, wow. And so that communication isn't as useful. So even within honeybees, you'll see differences. And if you take like an Italian honeybee and have it communicate with, a bee from France or America, they might get the distances wrong because their circles mean a different distance than the others. So yeah, it's pretty interesting.
For sure have more gold and talk with their wings a little more for sure.
That is so fascinating. I don't know, how you got pretty in depth into this, but anytime I get into looking at insects, I always have to wonder, like, wow, they vastly outnumber us. and they seem to be just as smart. Like, I wonder why they haven't taken over. Did you ever come away a little paranoid? Like, you know what, these bees could probably take over if they wanted to.
I know. They're really impressive for sure.
So you did another, I think you said maybe it was in your doctoral or postdoctoral, your thesis was on concept formation in dogs. I bet that was super interesting. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so that was with Jesus Rosales Ruiz. We published that in the Journal of Comparative Psychology, or International Journal of Comparative Psychology. And I was trying to teach my dog match to sample. And I really liked Jesus's way of mentoring students. It was go try something with your animal, go try something with your dog. Because I'm like, I don't know what I want to study. He's like, go try something with your dog and see what comes up. So I thought, well, I'll try and train a match to sample with toys. And I came back and I said, well, it's interesting that my dog Arrow keeps making these errors where he won't retrieve. So the matching behavior was pick up and retrieve that item to me. And I said, he keeps making certain errors where he won't do it with certain items. And I said, I think those items are things that we haven't played tug with before. And so from that, we said, well, there's our question. So we looked at whether we did an experimental setup where I would put out different toys that I knew had a history of being played with tug with him, and toys that were also, from my perspective, a toy, but we hadn't played tug with, and found that he would retrieve toys that he played tug with, not retrieve toys that he didn't play tug with. And then we did a multiple baseline with we had 3 items that he would not retrieve. After getting some baseline, I would play tug with them and he would start to retrieve them after me playing tug with them. And then we did a transfer stimulus control test too. So we then asked him to do a nose touch to the toy and put up non-toys next to them, and found that when we taught him with a few exemplars to touch the toy with his nose, he would then touch all the toys with his nose at a higher level than non-toys. So he seemed to have a transfer. So it seemed to fit into, a concept not based on physical characteristics, because these toys varied in whether they're plushy, their color, their size. And so it was really a concept that was unified by the function, by the reinforcer, which was tug.
Interesting. Yeah, I thought about that actually the other day, because we have a new dog. Unfortunately, he doesn't like grab a lot of shoes and stuff like that. But I was thinking about it from a dog perspective of like a shoe versus like a dog toy. For us, it's like, yeah, one's clearly a human item, one's clearly not. But for them, or like a chew versus a breadstick, like how are they supposed to know which one they can play with and destroy and which one they can't? Like that's an interesting. So were there any, so in your situation, it seems like if they had a history with it, then they would continue to engage with it. Do you have any kind of hypotheses on them then extrapolating that to other items, if that makes sense on what I'm asking?
Yes, like generalizing to similar items.
So them to somehow understand that like this stuffed animal is a toy, but this shoe or this blanket isn't a toy or something like that.
Yeah, I'd be curious about that. One of our current dogs, when my mom comes to visit, she always brings dog toys, and our dog will rifle through her suitcase and find the toy and bring it out. And it's like, she's like, that's clearly for me. That's a dog toy. And so I'd be curious to know if there is a scent associated with coming from a pet store or something along those lines, or if there are some structural features that our dog is able to say, that's a dog toy, that's for me. Certainly errors are still made, right? You're like, that's a cat toy, or that's actually an old stuffed animal from my childhood. And so there are errors that, make sense, that they look the same, they're plushy. So why wouldn't you think it's a toy for you? So I suspect there are maybe some structural features like plushiness that speak to that. Maybe there's some scent coming from pet stores or things like that. But I think you're bringing up one of those things where, again, it's a credit to our animals that they eventually figure this out, right? Initially, they might not. They might chew your shoes and everything. But usually over time, they figure out, that's not mine, this is mine. And it is really impressive, because like you said, how would they have any idea what's theirs and what's not theirs when they look similar? And you can even get toys in the shape of shoes and different things, right? And so it's really impressive that they do eventually discriminate on some quality.
Yeah, their discrimination is crazy because my dog has so many toys and balls and stuff, and usually when he wants a ball, he wants like one specific ball, and like we've got 40 balls that are like the exact same texture, whatever, but he will go like hunt for this and like bark at us and like I want this blue ball with the orange stripes, like that's the one that I want, even though I can't find it right now, and he'll like go hunting for it, even though there's like 20 other balls that are very similar that are easily accessible to him.
That's interesting. We deal so much with the idea of visual discrimination. And then for a dog, the auditory and olfactory piece might be a stronger driving force here. Can you talk about that a little bit? Like, how does that become a consideration in your training? Because I imagine olfaction, for example, I mean, that's got to be huge for a dog. They can certainly hear much better than we do. And then, what would the differences be then? Because clearly they can visually discriminate too, but that might be a weaker sense for a dog than compared to a human. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. And I agree. I think the olfaction is such an important part, and we don't get to appreciate that. And we don't get to understand then how they're discriminating. So we can't predict like, oh, you're going to respond this way to this person or this way to that person based on their smell, or picking up, why that item is the best item and it smells a certain way. And so that makes it hard for us, right? Because we can't discriminate at the same level and be able then to either support them in what they want to do or help train in certain ways. I was thinking back to my Mal with the stranger danger. There were a few times when I first had her that she duped me, where she would see somebody at a distance and show affiliative behavior. And it's like, oh, maybe you do want to say hi. And she would approach, and I think the silhouette must have just been similar enough to someone else she knew and liked that she's like, oh, I know that person. And then she'd get up and take one sniff of them and was like, whoa, 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 like, you're not who I thought you were.
Oh, wow.
And so it was really the olfaction for her that she was using to discriminate between people. And I don't think we appreciate that nearly enough, of how much they might be able to tell us apart individually based on our scent. My shepherd that I mentioned earlier that had challenges at the vet, he was social with everybody. And then one time we were out and there was a veterinarian on campus, and we went up to say hi, and he barked at her. That was the only person he had ever barked at. And I said, oh, apologize, I'm so sorry. And she had just come from the vet clinic and had been doing some like biopsies and stuff. And I think he smelled vet. Yeah. And he's like, whoa, you're dangerous.
Well, and it looks nothing like the vet office here. Why is that smell here, right? Like, what? Wait a minute.
Exactly. And she wasn't dressed as a vet. And so I didn't discriminate her as a vet, right? I didn't think, oh, this is going to be a problem because he has challenges with the vets. But he discriminated her as a vet. And so I think that's what is really hard, right? I perceived the person one way, he perceived her the other way. And so I wasn't able to predict what he was going to do and make better choices for him and for her. And so that's, I think, where those differences in our perceptions can really be tough.
Well, and again, it makes me think of that, that in terms of now a bad behavior on behalf of the dog. If you're not with the right population, clearly you and the vet probably worked through that or analyzed through that. But yeah, you're out at the park and it does that to a total stranger, and now suddenly you've got an aggressive dog. And again, I think we go through a lot of the same, social stigmas or circumstances with our clients in terms of going to certain places and saying, well, number one, this is pretty typical behavior for any 4-year-old. And then, yes, this 4-year-old we're working with might have communication challenges or other things that they present with that then, drive that connotation or that speculation a little further. So how interesting to make that parallel.
This ends part 1 for the interview. Please return for part 2 with Dr. Erica and always analyze responsibly.
ABA on Tap is recorded live and unfiltered. We're done for today. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. See you next time.